Okay, cool. Okay, yeah. Okay, very briefly, I think today what I'll be talking about and sharing a little bit about one of the projects or products that I was working on, which is called ScamShield. For those who are in Singapore and who are using iOS, you might have heard of it. And I'll briefly run through it in a little bit. Yeah, so maybe before we start, just a little bit, quick bit about myself. Yeah, I'm married and I have a kid. He's 2 years old. So for those of you who have kids, if anyone have kids, yeah, it's a sleepless period of time right now for me. Graduated in electrical engineering in 20. So I'm the class of 2008. So I graduated in like 2011, something like that. Yeah. So my startup journey really started in NUS Entrepreneurship Society, where I was a director for one of the global competitions, as well as the co-president for the NES. And then that's kind of how I started getting involved in startups, as well as the idea of how technology can bridge a lot of the business gaps for businesses, right? But I sold off. I sold out and I went on to Oracle Singapore as a technical consultant and a go-to-market strategist. So we're working on enterprise large scale solutions. In Oracle, we scaled one of the largest products called Exadata to $1 billion business. I mean, obviously, I wasn't the one driving the $1 billion business, right? But I'm always very proud to say that I was part of the team that actually helped to drive a $1 billion business in like, I think it was like under 3 years. So it was really, really exciting to be in Oracle then. I started Buooy in 2013, and I think one of the questions in Pigeonhole was, what is Buooy? And honestly speaking, Buooy is nothing that fantastic. It's kind of like a holding company. That was during a period of time when people were actually going digitalized. So we're helping them with digital transformation in terms of figuring out how their digital strategy was going to be, implementing things, helping them to move to e-commerce, getting responsive sites, helping them move different parts of their products up online. But it was also a holding company for me and my business partner to try a bunch of different startups. Jaga-me is not one of those startups, but we were involved in everything from events management to actually Food Panda equivalent. So we actually tried to start a Food Panda equivalent before Food Panda was here. But in 2016, I transitioned. I founded Jaga-me together with two other friends of mine. And I was the Chief Technology and Product Officer for about 3 years before I left in September 2019. And I joined Open Government Products in May 2020. So in between, I was taking care of my kid, but at the same time, I was also consulting for a number of companies in terms of a number of SMEs in terms of like what's their AI strategy going to be, how they're going to be, how they are. One company was like how AI was going to be utilized in their organization. Another one was how it's a property data company. So we're talking about like restructuring data and how do we extract value from that data for their customers and etc. So there are a few companies that I was consulting for. But I joined OGP as a software engineer in May 2020. And I'll be joining Aura in August 2021. So that's next week. Yeah, so that's pretty exciting. So coming soon, I'll be joining as a VP of engineering there. So I'll be going back into healthcare. The difference is that in the past, Jaga-me was actually a Grab for healthcare. So we had a pool of like around 450 nurses in Singapore that we deployed into homes to do home-based care. So mostly for like geriatric care, pediatric care. Not pediatric. Okay, we have pediatric care, but geriatric care, palliative care, oncology care in a home-based setting. But with Aura, it's a little bit different. We're doing a vertically integrated model. So we actually kind of like brand our own pharmaceutical, and we have everything from the pharmaceutical all the way up to the telehealth platform. We tackle it primarily like men's and women's health. So if, for example, you have, let's say, you have difficulties conceiving, and you don't want to visit a clinic, or a clinic is not as simply available. That's probably more prominent in other countries like Malaysia, Indonesia. You can come to our telehealth platform, and we'll help you to manage that. And we'll probably expand to different verticals, but our primary ones right now are men's and women's health. Yeah.
Just a quick plug, Aaron is hiring for his new team, in case anyone's interested.
Yeah, I didn't do a quick plug yet, but yeah, we are definitely looking for software engineers and product folks and UI UX guys. So definitely, if you're interested, please reach out to me and I'll be happy to chat. Yeah. But most recently, I was in open government products. I believe Alvin spoke to you guys like 2 weeks ago. So I'm not going to introduce open government products. You guys probably know about it. I was a software engineer there, pretty much covering the entire stack. Pretty much everybody on OGP covers the entire stack. But I was doing, pretty much everything from DevOps to infrastructure all the way down to native mobile applications. So some of the products that I worked on, okay, it's lagging. One of them is called SgID. So we actually built a, so it's actually integrated with SingPass right now. If you don't know, so if you guys have SingPass on iOS or Android, it's actually integrated. I can share with you all how to access that. But basically, it's a privacy preserving protocol that allows you to actually share data with businesses or government organizations. And what's interesting is that it's, I wouldn't say a sovereign identity, but essentially we store that information in an encrypted manner on your phone itself. So actually, when you're passing information, you're passing the information that exists in your phone. So you are literally carrying around your identity everywhere you go, as compared to what SingPass usually does, which calls it from an API. So if you're interested, I can share with you about the pros and cons of that protocol and everything. But it's a very interesting technological piece. But it's a little bit complex because it touches on pretty heavy encryption issues and security issues. So I'm not going to discuss that. The other one that I worked on was called Pay.gov. Or rather PayGovSG. So PayGovSG is basically kind of like a government officer portal that we integrate together with Stripe to allow for credit card payments to be made. So I don't know if any of you guys have actually made payments with the Singapore government before. You have to go through NETS or you have to go to an AXS, and it's a horribly painful and a horribly ugly process. And for the officers at the back end, when you do reconciliation, it's a nightmare. So we built out a solution like PaySG to actually help them resolve this issue. So that was my last project before I left. They are running it into a couple of trials or beta trials in August actually. Yeah, so that's one. The other one that is probably more relevant of what we're going to discuss today is ScamShield. So it's an AI, or rather not AI, but more of like a machine learning model that sits within your phone, currently available on iOS, that actually detects scams, blocks them out, and then also reports these scams to us so that we can work together with the Singapore Police Force to act on these scams. So some of the products, or rather tech stacks that we worked on in OGP. So this is not this on top of the things that I've done outside, but we work a lot with AWS, everything from Elastic Beanstalk to RDS Aurora. We used a lot of GitHub Actions, Travis. I don't know if you guys know about continuous integration and continuous deployment.
You cover that, yeah.
Yeah. So stuff like that, as well as Cloudflare. And on the front end side of things will be things like Chakra React, and we did quite a bit of a Kotlin native development for Android. We did obviously Express with TypeScript and Unusual for OGP, which is like I was working a lot on Python and Fast API because like ScamShield is a lot of machine learning stuff. I wasn't touching on machine learning, but as much, but just for consistency, we did the backend Python as well. So background of ScamShield. So here's the thing. With technology democratized a lot of things. Unfortunately, it also democratized the scams. So it made scams become very accessible, or rather it made people become very accessible to scammers. It's not difficult for scammers to actually sort of like buy a phone number or whatever, and then with technology automate a lot of the processes necessary to actually just mass send scams. And you can send 10,000 messages. If one hooks on, the returns are very high for these scammers. And what we end up seeing is that like last year, so this is actually 2020, there were more than $200 million that were cheated, right? And scams are exploding. Why is it not appearing? Okay. Interestingly, between 2019 and 2020, scams increased by 65%. And then out of all crimes in Singapore, believe it or not, 42% of crime is actually scams. And That's insane. That means if somehow you manage to find a way to solve scam, you have crime rates in Singapore, and that's crazy, right? And so that's one of the motivation factors as to why we wanted to do ScamShield, because we wanted to find a way to block these scams. We wanted to find a way to notify people and let people say, hey, these are scams, and you got to watch out for it, and you got to move away. And we wanted to address it as early as possible, right? So it's kind of impossible to stop scammers from buying the phone numbers. So what you do is the communication. So how do you invalidate kind of like the usage of that phone number? And SMS is one of the critical start points. And you'd realize that SMS is one of those things that you had the keyword is limited localized protection, which means that at a large scale, like Google has a kind of like a scam team, but they look at it at a global level, right? So when it comes to Singapore, it's like, I'm going to solve scams for 5 million people. They don't care about that, right? That's not a big deal to them. So it's very limited in terms of the kind of protection that you're going to get. But the other one is because they're looking at it at a global level, a lot of the scams that are localized to the Singaporean context is not being caught. So we wanted to address that portion there. And I mean, you can talk about WhatsApp, emails, or Telegram in the future, but SMS is currently like one of the biggest driving factors, and that's why we started to step into it. So we looked into other solutions, right? And when we looked at it, we worked it out from a hackathon, actually. So the caveat is I wasn't part of the hackathon, but when we looked at existing solutions, we realized that there were a few problems. The first one is it's always reliant on third party. So first and foremost, it's like, especially for Android, you are reliant on the phone manufacturer. If you don't know about this, like Android doesn't actually have a junk folder. Android does not have it at a core API level, correct? Or Android OS, there is no junk folder for SMS. So if you see a junk folder in your Huawei phone and your Google phone, it is implemented by the manufacturer on their OS level, on their own specific variant of the OS, right? So it's very reliant on third party to how you're going to be addressing it. The other one is that there's very low privacy. So they're not like, until very recently, they didn't want to put a machine learning model onto the phone itself. So what ends up happening is that you're going to send this information back to a third-party service, and that could mean your legitimate information. And some information are very intrusive. For example, healthcare information. Maybe, for example, someone is saying that you have to go down for, say, STD test. For example, they send you an SMS, and just based on the number and who's sending you and the fact that you have an appointment means that you have a suspected STD. So imagine if this information gets collected about you, like, or gets hacked, right? Like what can it do to your reputation, especially if you're a reputable person, right? The other one is non-localized. So like I mentioned, they are mostly targeting generic, like people, or very likely US or Europe-centric information. So that's not useful, or rather not, the efficacy is low. The other one is that data is not being shared with local law enforcement agencies. So we can ask them for the information, but they're going to take a very long time to come back. So the reaction time, the way that you're going to be able to react to that information is very limited. Yeah. So when we looked into what we wanted out of ScamShield, we were very clear. We wanted privacy focused, right? And that means no personal identifiable information tracked. We don't even put, as of when I last left, we don't even put like a tracker to track your job, any of your errors that's happening in your app, actually. So precisely because we didn't want to track that information. But most importantly is that we run the machine learning model on the device, and if it thinks that it's a spam, then we'll send it back up. Yeah, so that ensures a very high rate of privacy. Yeah. The other one is high trust. So we hoped that because it's done by the Singapore government, and it's not like some other governments elsewhere, but it's the Singapore government where we hold ourselves to very high integrity. We believe that we are trusted and we are data sensitive, so and we are accountable. So we hope that with that high trust, people will download the application more. The other one, most importantly, is that it's localized. So it's only accessible in the Singapore App Store. So we've actually had other countries, okay, I can't say which other countries, but a few other countries who've asked us, hey, can you get access? And we said, no, we're only going to put it in the App Store, Singapore, primarily because then we are sure that the people who are downloading the applications are most likely based in Singapore, right? And most importantly is that this information, so since we don't collect any personally identifiable information, this information we share with the Singapore Police Force, and this allows them to track, categorize, and react to scams. So they know, okay, like this love scam is happening, or this gambling scam is happening, or there's a rise in this specific kind of scam. And we actually have a very huge network of different like scam agencies that actually work to resolve these problems. And so categorizing it allows them to react very fast. And then we can work with the telcos to block and reclaim the numbers. And you'll be surprised how difficult it is to actually reclaim like numbers. But yeah, so it's important to work with the telcos quickly. Yeah. So the team behind it is Lena, Laura, Daniel, myself, and Christabel. So I'm going to skip Lena and Christabel because not because they're not important. In fact, they're really important, but just that we are in an engineering context, right? So very quickly, Laura, who's a data scientist, she's in charge of our business intelligence dashboards that SPF used to look at aggregated data. She maintains the ML model and she maintains the classifier API. Daniel primarily looks at the iOS and mobile applications, which we wrote in React Native, and there's some amount of native application that we had, native code that we had to write for the app extension, and he looks at that. And for myself, I was looking at this Singapore Police Force, the dashboard. That's the one that they use to basically block numbers, investigate cases, so on and so forth, as well as the backend API and the infrastructure, as well as the Android application, which it's still in development, but it's an Android application and it's written in Kotlin now. Yeah. Okay, I'm mindful of time. So the outcome is you have an iOS mobile application that automatically sends up scams, but also allows you to report these scams. And we run this machine learning models on device, and we go through a series of checks to filter out the scams essentially. And so what's our efficacy, right? So within 6 months of launch, that was probably like April this year, something like that. We had 100 over 1,000 installs. We had like 700 over 1,000 SMS reported to us, and we blocked like 5,000 over numbers. So that's a huge amount of numbers. And to be frank with you, like it's probably a little bit more. And this honestly doesn't cover all the WhatsApp and Telegram ones, but you can imagine just the sheer amount of like work and the sheer amount of effort that we put into actually block this number. Sorry, you're saying?
Should we all install this now? I get scams every day. Like, should I just?
Yeah, you should.
Is it good?
Yeah. In fact, we're talking to some of the minister, and he told me he asked us like, is the litmus test of whether or not our app works is should our ministers install? Then I'll be like, I was telling him, actually, why haven't you installed it already? Like you should really have installed it. Like you really should have done that.
Another plug: install this app.
Okay. But we can share about that differently. So that's the efficacy, right? So the question then comes is like, what kind of protection does ScamShield actually give? The first one is what we call active protection, which is we block and reclaim numbers. So that's very straightforward. That's like everybody knows about that, right? Like we block and we can reclaim these numbers. But the other one is passive protection. So this is very interesting because if you think about it, with 100,000 installs, theoretically, if you did a statistical calculation, correct, and don't hold me to it because we didn't do a formalized study on this, but based on my calculations, if let's say someone sends out say 1,000 SMSs, 1,000 of the same SMS to everybody, right? There's a very high probability that at least one of the folks that have installed our ScamShield would have caught the SMS and would have then reported it back to us, which means that while we may not be actively protecting every single person, we actually have knowledge of the kind of scams that's happening. And in fact, we know the scale of this particular like message or this particular number, how much it's hitting people, just statistically and just based on probability. And that gives you a very good surveillance. And that's something that you really can't get if you were working with third-party scam apps. The fact that we have this allows us to react very quickly to it and helps us to mitigate problems, especially with the whole like for example, the DBS scam. It was interesting because the minute it hit, right, we literally knew about it very quickly, and we were able to react to like the DBS scams very quickly. And that's why I have to be very frank with you, I think like they moved on to other banks because we stepped in very quickly. And that's the reality of scams, however, which is that there are some hard things that's happening with these scams. So I'm going to talk about 3 different hard things. I'm going to end off with like a technical challenge, and probably I'll do a fast fire kind of like technical challenge, technical solution, and kind of like share with you a bit of the practicalities of working as a software engineer, and some of the things to think about as a software engineer very quickly. Okay. But first one, okay, enforcement challenge. That's not a technical problem. This is how do you catch the scammers? And unfortunately, sorry, it's all not coming out for me. So scammers are surprisingly not in Singapore, right? Okay, unsurprisingly not in Singapore. So we can block them, but they keep coming back, and they find different ways to work around it. Like scammers are apparently not very good at their English, but they're really persistent in their approach towards reaching out to us. The problem is that you can't catch them without the cooperation of another country. And honestly speaking, it's usually not worth the effort. If they, I mean, the practicality is like if they scam maybe a few $100 or a few $1,000, it's probably a lot more effort to try and catch every individual one. So you just saw like we have 5,000 numbers that we blocked. Imagine trying to chase after 5,000 people overseas. That's not possible. So the reality is there's an enforcement challenge that we face. The second one is a technological challenge. So for the astute, you'll be asking yourself like, hey, there's the iOS app, but what happened to Android? Like, why you don't care about Android? And that's actually been raised up in Parliament. So that's crazy, right? And the truth is, we couldn't because Android doesn't have a sandboxed environment like Apple that allows the interception of SMS. And what I mean by that is that in Apple, they actually allow you to build an app extension, which is a sandbox environment, that your SMS come in, or rather you can build an application which can intercept an SMS, and basically that app code can't really interact with a lot of other things. They know that it's isolated. And essentially what it does is that it allows us to block this SMS so it doesn't go to the end user. Android doesn't have this. Android only has this kind of like global concept of what they call a UICC carrier privilege, which is like a God mode. So like with this privilege, it's a bit complex, but basically they give you a cert, and then you basically can sign your application with it, and the OS actually looks at it and go, hey, this is like this like God mode app that can access a lot of very sensitive information on your phone, and that includes SMSs. And so while we can read the app without the UICC privileges, we can't intercept and sort of like block it. And the other problem is, even if we did want to approach with the UICC carrier privileges, you can't just like install it like over the air. There's something called over the air updates, but you can't just like push it to the App Store or the Play Store and then it just works. You actually have to replace your SIM cards. Like for a lot of Singaporeans, you have to replace the SIM card, and nobody's going to replace the SIM card just to install ScamShield as an app. So that's all.
I'll do it for you.
Yeah. And so the options were either we create our own SMS application. So that means that, the thing that you type your SMSs in, we can create it and you set it as a default and that works. But that's crazy because there's just too much work for, and not the core value of ScamShield. The other one is we implement UICC, but like what I mentioned, that's not going to work. We could try to convince Google to make a critical and potentially dangerous change, but you'd be surprised how little swaying power a country of 5 million people has. So it's really hard to get Google to do it. And so the best option, honestly, is that we probably do some kind of follow-up notification, but SMS still gets through to people. So we're testing out to see if this works. Yeah. So this is a technological challenge. So for a lot of software engineers, you realize like the core infrastructure and technologies you work on have limitations that you just can't overcome. Yeah. So to the part that could work is technical challenge. So I don't know how much you guys know about like scaling, but one of the things about like ScamShield is we literally have like millions of records, like millions and millions of records of scams, of reports, of data, right? How do you query them efficiently? Like in specifically, like SPS needs to look at this dashboard on a daily basis. How do you query a few million records without it lagging for a long period of time? Because it's actually a pretty complex data structure at the back. Sorry, it's not coming up on me again. Okay, so one way is we could add more resources, right? So a lot of it is constrained by the database itself. So the queries could take like maybe like 20 seconds, and you can let the officers just sit there for 20 seconds, but that doesn't make a lot of sense if they're like flipping through multiple pages, right? It can't be like I do 10 pages and I have to wait 20 seconds each. You could increase your resources, but that's probably expensive and doesn't really scale well. So every time, like if we go to like 20 million rows, 50 million rows, 100 million rows, would that mean that we have to keep increasing resources just for the query? It's probably too expensive. The other one is what most of you probably would have learned in some level. I'm not sure if they did, like indexing, right? And you'll be surprised, indexes are not the solution. They're not the catch-all solutions for everything. What we discovered when we did this was, sorry, it's not coming out now. Is that there were actually very minimal improvement. The indexing actually shifted the time cost from the query into the query planner. And yeah, so pro tip, if you guys haven't already learned explain and analyze, right? Like these are, it's probably very crucial when you want to do like system optimization or data optimization. So take a look at that. So the other way that we implemented and the way that I suggested was to use something called a QRS pattern, which is essentially called a command query responsibility segregation. This is a little bit more complex, but in essence, if you have done any CRUD systems like a create, read, update, delete model, you read and write to the same database. Now, what happens if your queries are too expensive? That means your reads are too expensive. You could actually move that into two different systems. Think about it, right? I write to one service and I query for another service. In more complex architectures, you may have multiple different databases. But for us, what we did was, because we were using Postgres, we chose to use something called materialized view, which is basically a cache in the database itself. Just something interesting for you guys to learn, like a materialized view. Like MySQL doesn't have a materialized view, I believe. Postgres does. And it caches the information, caches the most expensive query. So we read to that. The trade-off is that data is now no longer real time. Like if a scam came in within X minutes, it's not going to appear in the dashboard. But depending on how long you set X to be, you'll appear immediately after that. But the outcome is that we actually improve query time from like 12 seconds all the way down to 150 milliseconds. So they can switch through pages almost instantaneously. And so you think about like in software engineering, a huge amount of time is spent talking about trade-offs and what makes sense. And while we talk a lot about like big O notations in terms that kind of trade-offs, the practical level of software engineering is that the user-centric trade-offs are a lot more important than the big O notations, because cost of computation is so cheap. A lot of times you can throw money at it, but the user experience is something that you can't change. So one thing to note, and this is probably a practical lesson, which is that when I proposed this solution, to me it was Occam's razor. It was like simple, it was straightforward, it was easy. But the reality is that what is simple to one engineer is not the same as, it's not as simple to another engineer. Like introducing the concept of what a command query responsibility segregation is something that is somewhat esoteric, or probably not esoteric, but probably like unfamiliar to a lot of other software engineers. And so when they look at it, they go, oh, I'm not open to your ideas because I haven't yet even learned and understood what it does. And so it takes a lot of convincing, it takes a lot of talking and discussions. And I think when you start working in software engineering teams, having this kind of one open-mindedness to accept new ideas, but the other one, which is that when you want to communicate new ideas, it's actually pretty difficult because people have a lot of layers of learning before they actually come to accept that, hey, yeah, maybe your idea is best. So just to point out that, while in software engineering, we have this idea of like Occam's razor, the simplest solution is the best. Sometimes what is simple to one person may not be the same as, may not be as simple to others. So the other thing I wanted to point out is that that the hard thing about software, and I don't know if you ever heard this before, but the hard thing about software is that there are no right answers, only wrong ones. To paraphrase, it's like you either die a hero or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain, which is that your software solutions, there are many different ways of doing it. There are probably wrong ways to do it, but there are a lot of different options that are probably right. And most of the time, as you scale and as you change and as technology improves, they end up becoming wrong answers. And the hard part is like getting the right answers. And so when we talk about software engineering, a lot of these discussions, sometimes you just choose what makes sense now and just just do it first. And then we work the solutions along the way. So that's just one of the things that I thought I'll leave you off with. I hope that answers that was a quick and good introduction into ScamShield and the work that we've done. I'm open to any questions that you guys may have.
That was awesome. Yeah, so much of the so much of what past speakers have mentioned about trade-offs and about communication needed with coding. I think what you provided like a practical frame for us to hang those thoughts on, like in what situations would you have to do the trade-offs? In what situations do you have to convince your teammates to pursue something? Okay, we have a good number of questions on Pigeonhole, so I think I will start to pull from there. Yeah, I think that was great if you stop sharing, and then you can, Aaron, do you have the Pigeonhole link so you can take a look as well?
I
would just resend it.
Yeah, I do have it.
You got it? You got it? Let me just resend it in Zoom. Sure. Okay, so I'm going to start off, kick off the questions from there. Thanks everyone for asking, and please continue to ask and upvote questions. What do you look from Porter? What do you look out for when hiring an entry-level software engineer? The issue that everybody cares about here.
Yeah. So very generically, so so the interesting thing was that I was asked this question during a team meeting with all my team. Back when I was in Jaga-me, like I had my team sitting down, and one of my junior product managers actually asked me that question for everybody. So that's a hard one to answer. But okay, in general, and this very generically, I look for two things: nice and independent. I'm not looking at technical capabilities yet because I know that you probably don't have that. But one, I look for nice, and nice means I'm looking for someone who is able to maintain people relationships even when they're stressed. Because most of the time, like when you do interviews, right, like a lot of people will just go like, hey, like you seem like a nice person, blah, 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 blah. But then when things hit the fan, when shit hits the fan, they start to suck themselves inwards, and then they start to go like, reflect the stress that they have outwards, and it affects other people. So nice actually is quite hard to figure out. But what I'm looking for to see is you have examples of times when you have worked well with people, even though you were very, very stressed out. And obviously, being an amicable personality means that you will fit very nicely with the team and you build good team culture, right? So that's nice. Independent would be probably about two things. One is resourcefulness. So I think resourcefulness is one of those very underrated things, but essentially, like in software engineering, like you're not going to get a lot of hand holding, mostly not because people don't have time, but because it's actually very difficult to communicate learnings as easily. Like there's a lot of depth of understanding that you need to have, and you kind of need to clear those depths before you get to the point, if you ever really realize, right? So if you are resourceful and you know how to figure things out by yourself, right, you will learn those depths, and then we can talk about higher level order things and considerations. And the second one about independent is really about someone who basically you don't have to who takes a lot of initiative and go like, yeah, I want to solve problems. I'm not here because I need to be told like exactly what to do. I'm here to solve problems. That's what I'm looking for. Yeah.
Awesome. Porter, does that answer your question?
Yeah, definitely. I just really wanted to know his thoughts.
Okay.
So communication is key. Yes. Thank you.
Okay. Next question is a question from me. How would you advise students choosing between joining startups versus larger companies?
The reality is, if you need certain levels of stability, you should not join a startup. So to me, there's 3 points, right? The first one is about stability, your propensity for risk. If you need to, like if you have a kid, if you have family concerns, you should not join a startup. Like that should not be the case. Like, okay, like I'm saying that and I'm joining in a startup, right? But I'm saying as a entry-level software engineer, you should not, because the work pace and the things and the amount of learning you need to do by yourself is going to be a lot higher than if you did in a large company. And the truth is, not everybody should be joining startups. That's the reality, right? And large companies actually provide a lot of opportunities, a lot of stability, and a lot of learnings. So I would say that that's one. The second one is probably about how much mentorship you're going to be able to get, right? Or rather, okay, let's put it this way. You should choose, on top of the job that you're supposed to look for, the biggest thing that you should be looking for is your reporting manager. So it's not so much a startup or large companies, but it's more of like, if you have a good boss in a bad workplace, you're probably going to have a better experience than a bad boss in a good place. And so that, to me, is like, who is your reporting manager and can you click well with him? And most importantly, does he have a nurturing nature? If he's someone who's willing to sit down with you and talk you through things, that's great. But if it's someone who goes like, and I've worked in Oracle, which is a US startup, US MNC, right? They really just throw you into sync. They really just go, I was put onto products, and when I went up to ask for like certification courses on this thing, they were like, "Hey, there's plenty of information on the web." And I was sitting right next to the training room, you know what I mean, where they were literally giving a course, and I was saying like, "I don't even need you to pay me. I just need to get some time off to just sit in the room to listen." And they said, "No, I'm sorry, you can't do that." I'm not saying Oracle is a bad company, but I'm saying that the culture matters a lot. So that's the second one. I think the third one is really about whether or not like you are projecting forward your career advancement. So there are certain large companies that, for example, are still very much working on, I would say, legacy systems or legacy ways of doing things. That may not actually propel you forward. Like if you're going to project yourself like 5-10 years down the road, like software is moving so quickly, you're probably going to be outdated within the next 6 months. So you wouldn't want to join a company like that. Likewise for a startup, if it's using old technologies, you also shouldn't be joining that. Yeah, sorry, moving on.
Awesome. Thanks for that. Did that answer that answered my question? Okay. Next question is from Samantha. What technologies are you interested in or most excited to learn?
Interesting. Well, on a day-to-day level, or not day-to-day level, on a very small level, it's probably how do you pronounce it? SwiFT. So that's actually something that I'm personally quite interested to look into that. But probably, yeah, but I guess you're probably more interested in what kind of like technologies long-term that we're looking into. Honestly speaking, blockchain, but not in the concept of like cryptocurrency, so on and so forth, but in the concept of like a distributed ledger. So I think that it has a lot of potentials for healthcare. I know it's a bit iffy. We're not going to store healthcare data inside there, but that as a kind of like a ledger of your transactions, a ledger of your how you're reaching sort of like that, like kind of like a directory of data, is really going to be really interesting to me. So that's one. Other ones are probably, honestly speaking, AI. I know I'm probably telling you things that you probably are really interested or that it's probably repeated. But at the end of the day, for me, I think healthcare, and I'm looking at it from a perspective of healthcare because I think healthcare is one of those things that's been lagging very heavily behind. So AI, I think, has a lot of potential. It's just that people have been applying AI in the wrong places. For example, one of the companies that we were looking at, so in the past, when we were looking into AI for healthcare, we're thinking like, okay, if we can get everybody's healthcare data, we can find some way of like helping to reduce like insurance costs and everything. And you know what happened? Like there's this company that actually went to take AI, and instead of measuring healthcare information, they measured your demographics. So they want to say like, if you are a Singaporean Chinese with a specific property and a specific like earning like salary, yearly salary, correct? Like we can actually roughly guess what is your likelihood of recurringly going back to the hospital. And that makes sense because it's a lifestyle issue. Like a lot of healthcare is lifestyle. But we see so many companies actually jumping back onto the AI bandwagon, trying to collect healthcare data. In the end, they don't make a lot more, they don't make as much impact. So actually, I'm very interested in seeing AI in healthcare because I think that there are different ways of approaching it. Yeah.
Awesome. Sam, does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you for sharing.
Awesome. Okay, I'm trying to answer the questions that have been here for longer. Next question from Jia En. How do hackathons work? How much knowledge might we need before attempting one?
Okay, so compared to that, I run a Christian digital native community called Indigitus, and we run a hackathon every year. There's actually one coming out of October. So if you guys are keen, you can take a look at that. If anyone here is a Christian or non-Christian is welcome to join as well. So in those hackathon, I guess I have a sufficient amount of years of experience organizing and attending to comment about that. The honest truth is, you need to have stuff. Ideally, to value add to the team, I would say you should be able to take a hackathon starter kit. Like I don't know if you've gone to GitHub, but just Google hackathon starter kits. Right, you see a ton of it like Express. You should be able to the level of skill you should have is you should be able to deploy that, and you should be able to hook up like maybe an authentication system with a bit of, you probably don't need authorization, but like authentication system, you should be able to like do at least be able to create, write, read, update stuff in the database, and be able to present that on a web app. That's it. Like that's the bare minimum that you need to have. And then everything else, it's all about domain specific information. Like you'll probably be discussing about like what is the problem solution that you're going to have, and then how does that map to probably a domain model that has nothing to do with your coding skills. Your coding skills just at maximum web application, authentication, and the ability to just put information into a database and extract. That's good enough. Yeah.
Awesome. John, does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Next question from Porter. What was your motive? Oh, okay, I think I'm going to combine two questions. I had a question, Porter had a question, and they're both upvoted. My question was, what were your biggest takeaways from founding and leading technology and product at Jaga-me? And Porter's question was, what was your motivation for leaving Jaga-me to join OGP?
So what was my biggest takeaway from founding and leading technology and product at Jaga-me? I guess the first one is that technology is not a means to an end in itself. Like technology, like there are no tech companies. All companies are tech companies, if you think about it that way. That means pretty much either all companies become very tech enabled, or they start to phase out in essence, right? And what that means is that technology is at most an enabler. So especially in healthcare, for example, you can't remove away the need for a doctor or a nurse. Like even in the new startup that I'm going to, one of the things that we have is we are setting up clinics. Like that's like you look at Doctor Anywhere, they have clinics, right? You can't run away from that. And that is at the end of the day something interesting about technology. So I guess from that perspective, unless you are running a tech company that is built for developers, there are no such thing as tech companies. So that's one of the things I've learned. Another thing that I've learned probably is the fact that people tend to, in the short term, people tend to overvalue technology and overestimate technology and underappreciate how much resources is needed. That means people tend to think like tech comes in and then like it solves all the problems, and I can do it with like $10,000. It's insane in the short term. But ironically, in the long term, people tend to overestimate the cost and underestimate the value of technology. That means because pretty much if you think about Moore's laws, right? Like Moore's law, in the long term, you're going to get a lot more capabilities, a lot more computing power, a lot more opportunities, and because when you look at it in the short term, you're only thinking about like a small tech team. But if you look at it for long term, you're talking about the entire world's developers all working collaboratively to build open source solutions and building technologies across the entire stack. And that means, like for example, React, right? Probably like 5 years ago, probably didn't exist. And then now you have something that can work on both mobile and web. Like that was inconceivable maybe like 5 years ago. So nobody would have thought that was possible. So on long term, so tech is a long term game. It's not a short term game, and most people tend to confuse that. So that's the other thing. So there's two things. So what motivated me to move from Jaga-me to, so in Jaga-me I was a founder. The truth is we were a social enterprise, and we at a certain level I'll be frank, like the compensation I got was not sustainable for me to have a family and a kid. Let's put it that way. So obviously it made a lot of sense for me to move on from there. And also my kid came in September 2019. So that was a great opportunity for me to just take 6 months off to just take care of my kid. And yeah, we were fortunate because my wife was going through she was promoted to be a manager at a period of time, and she was able to get back to work within 2 months of like giving birth. So it really helped on the family side of things. And obviously when I went to OGP, it was a great opportunity. And then now I'm like, with my kid being 2 years old, we're ready to go back to I don't know, doing startups again now. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing. Next question. Porter, did that answer your question?
Sort of. Because I was wondering, like, because from a CTO, to a SWE again, wondering whether there were what was the motivation?
What was the motivation?
The common assumption for me was that a CTO doesn't really get a lot of time coding. you do more of the management things, side of things. That's what I assumed. So when you go back down to the SWE, you would then do a lot more groundwork.
As
I was
in
wondering
moving from
why.
management to IC.
Yeah.
I guess I'm fine with it. So I don't know if you followed, what was this company? There was this particular company, I can't remember. It's not GitLab. I think there was one particular company where the founder, who was the CTO, was very proud, and it blew up in the software community because when he stepped down as chairman of the board, rather he stepped down from the board, he stepped down from his CTO position, and he went on to be an individual contributor in the company. And the truth is, everybody was very happy because they were like, that's like the dream. The truth is, if you are someone who likes to code and you like to program, correct, your dream role actually is in like individual contributor. It's like writing code. It's like that's kind of what you like to do, or be an engineering leveler. Like ideally, like you want to be a staff principal or a distinguished engineer, that kind of thing. Like management is actually not something for every single person. The truth is, I love to code. Like I love both sides of things. I love to build teams. I love to code. So either it was fine with me. The main difference as to why I decided to do this is because I felt that so in OGP, like we had a lot of work coding stuff. By the end of the day, healthcare has a specific like area that of interest in my heart. Like in particular, the challenge of actually bringing technology to healthcare is really hard. Like there are two industries that's really hard to digitally transform. That's legal and healthcare. The opportunity to do it together with a team that was this strong and this, to be frank with you, well funded is very, very rare. And a lot of the dreams that I used to have in Jaga-me for like, there were like 4 or 5 year plans in my head. We did it in like 6 months. So it's quite crazy and they're very fast paced. And so the opportunity was something I couldn't pass off. Like I was quite happy being in an IC role. I mean, honestly speaking, write code all day. I mean, it was fun building new products and having time to take care of my kid. That was ideal. I suppose it's trade-offs. Yeah.
Okay.
Trade-offs.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So exciting. Thank you.
Thank you. Next question from Jiang An. How was your transition from EE to software engineering?
In EE, okay, so the caveat is in 2008, there was a financial crash, right? But 2008, well, sorry to say, but like computer engineering was like the dumping ground for Singapore. Like, yeah, like not that many people who are like Kai, like Kairan, who went to like Stanford, but in NUS it's dumping ground. So electrical engineering was kind of the place that like most students kind of like wanted to go like it's either that or finance, right? So I ended up there. So turns out that on my first semester in my computer science, I did a trial paper and I got like 9 out of 25. And then I knew that was the thing I was going to do for the rest of my life. So the transition was very weird. It was to me discovering that I was very heavily motivated by failure, but also at the same time discovering that that coding was something that I was really interested in. So rather the question was, that since that was in my first semester, rather the question is, how did I transit from liking code to actually do engineering work? And the truth is, I never was a very good engineer. Like if you did all the mods, so I did a lot of like computer science mods, I did a lot of engineering mods. My engineering mods should have put me in something like, I don't know, second lower or like third class honors. I had to rely a lot on my computer science stuff to actually pull me up. It's not that I was great at computer science, but it's just that I think I had a lot more interest in it and I spent a lot more time studying that. So it wasn't so much a transition from EE to coding, but more like coding to EE, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And does that answer your question?
Yeah, thanks.
Awesome. Next question from Tinesh. Does ScamShield only work for SMSs? Can OGP change the ML parameters to pick up crime-related SMSs for SPF?
Crime-related matters, as in, what do you mean?
SMSs. Maybe Tinesh, you could elaborate?
Yeah, so I'm guessing now the way ScamShield works is that it takes the content of the SMS and then classifies it as scam or not scam, right?
Yeah.
So, and you feed it to SPF, right? So hunt down the people who are scamming people.
Yeah, that's right.
So if SPF asks you to find SMSs related to, I don't know, black market stuff, weapon stuff, can ScamShield do that? Can the same technology do that?
So the answer is no. Unfortunately, you would probably build different models for different issues. Like, okay, so if you're asking about like, okay, within the SMS, can we identify and categorize different types of scams? The answer is yes, and we're doing it right now. So we're building the solution to actually automatically kind of like categorize the scams. If you're talking about like moving away from SMS and say we want to aggregate a lot of different solutions like emails, WhatsApp, Telegram, so on and so forth, long form scam content to short form scam content to things like phone call. So the answer is for all the different channels, you've probably got to build different models because they work very differently. It's a bit like saying, can I use a e-commerce Amazon model to sell, I don't know, healthcare products? It's probably not going to work that way, right? So, but you've hit the nail on the head, and one of the things that we want to look at in ScamShield in the future is actually extending the kind of like to move away from just SMS, but also to become kind of like an aggregation, whereby we bring a lot of different scam related content together, and then that's when you really have kind of like a cross how to put it, like a cross plane across a lot of different communication platforms, and that allows you to figure out, hey, is this scam happening across different ways, across different platforms, and what is kind of like the journey of the scammer, right? Like what happens if someone jumps on the SMS, and how does that person gets carried forward, and how do we stop those things before it actually reaches the end goal of like the money being transferred, kind of thing. Yeah.
I think that was like the first part of the question, which is like it's right now it's located, it's limited to SMSs only and can't do stuff like WhatsApp, Telegram. But what I meant was the second part of the question was more like, is ScamShield sort of vulnerable to the same debacle that Trace Together is? Like, if SPF said, hey, since you're already reading everyone's SMSs, can you go and find out, stuff like illegal betting or people selling weapons or whatever via SMSs? Can you go and look for different kind of keywords in
as in, will we read other people like SMSs for other things? And the answer is no. So firstly, there's
well, not will, but can it be done?
Can it be done? I mean, everything can be done, but the answer is that it's people to do it. Yeah. And I can be very frank with you, there are certain things where I've literally stood up and I've literally said, no, like I'm not going to do that. And if anybody is interested in doing that, I'm stepping out of the project, kind of thing. And I'm not saying that the whole point is that there are things that are legal boundaries that we can't do. And to be frank with you, like it's not SPF who's asking it, it's not us who's asking it, but there are good mannered folks who are asking this thing, and collaboratively, there are people, we know the boundaries of what we can or should not do legally. Yeah, correct. So technically speaking, I mean, you can technically install an application that can do a lot of different things, right? But you're probably not going to allow that as a government. Yeah. And that's the whole point, right? That's the point. The point is, as a government, you're highly trusted, and that's the crux. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, I think we might have time for one more question. We'll see how it goes. Justin's question. And I think this is quite top of mind for folks here as well, because we're all from a bootcamp. What is the importance / makeup of software engineers that have a degree at OGP? Just a caveat, I think most people have a degree because generally there aren't as many bootcamp grads in the industry. What is the perception of bootcamp students in these environments?
I think you've asked that to Alwyn before, right? So
different perspective.
Yeah. I would say we don't discriminate between bootcamp students and not, and degree students, so on and so forth. The truth is, in our interview process, and I think I've told you before, like one of the things is we do a resume screening, and then after that we talk through with you with things like as in we give you a coding test and you live code it and so on and so forth. The truth is, unfortunately, what anecdotally I've seen, right, is that a lot of times when you go through the initial codility test, a lot of bootcamp students may not have the computer science knowledge, and it could be different Rocket Academy, right? Because a lot of the times you're looking at things like general assembly. They don't have that knowledge, that computer science knowledge to pass those questions.
And codility is a lot of algorithms, right?
Yeah, it's a lot of algorithms. That's right. Yeah. And then it becomes even more present when it comes down to the live coding test, right? And we'll ask you things like, for example, can you explain to me like how you would build a book index? And a lot of them don't even know what a book index is and don't even know what the index is, right? So if they don't even know what's an index, then that's really like half the game is over already, right? Yeah. So that's
when you say book index, you mean database index or like book index in the general book sense?
Yeah, in the general book sense, you know what I mean? Yeah,
Like a hash table or something.
yeah,
like that.
exactly. You see, like you're gonna go set a hash table, and they're like, yeah, okay, like how many from like GA actually knows like hash table, for example. But yeah, so something like that, right? So that's really some of the challenges that we face, and yeah, and truth is you are up against pretty strong candidates with who are coming in from like Ivy League schools and stuff, lah. So it tends to be that way, lah. Yeah.
Justin, does that answer your question?
Yep, thanks.
Awesome. Okay, maybe unfortunately we're running out of time, so I think maybe we'll just wrap up with one last summarizing question for Aaron. Aaron, if you had any advice, general advice for the group here and the broader listeners who are prospective software engineers breaking into the industry for the first time, what general advice would you give to the group?
Software is hard. A lot of times, especially learning new things, you're going to be banging your head against the table for days, or not weeks at end. The truth is, it's a time game. So my advice is, when you're having problems, just push through it. Okay, ask people. The first thing you do is ask people. If you have people you can ask, just ask. But if you can't, just push through it. Like, just push through it. Like, for example, when I did Colin, right? Colin in OGP, that was the first time I did it in my entire life. Nobody else in the team knew Colin. Pretty much had zero people to help. Couldn't really reach out to the rest of the GovTech folks to get help for some reason or another. And it's just pushing through, and we got things out, right? And you learn a lot from it. So the truth is, software, as much as it's like all learning things, it's really about persistency and just like whacking it until it works. Like, I don't know how to put it. Yeah. I mean, that's the reality. Yeah. It will get out. It will get out. You just have to have a lot of patience, a lot of like inner strength to do it. Yeah.
When you say pushing through, you don't mean like doing the same thing twice, right? You mean like following the
figuring out,
logic
like, yeah, like a lot, if you had to try and error, like 1,000 ways just to get it working, right? Try and error 1,000 ways to get it working. But of course, don't do that if you can ask someone. Like, if you can Google it, if you could figure it out, like do that lah. But a lot of time of, like, for example, is spent reading. Like, for example, figuring out like why this particular thing doesn't work on your OS. Or for example, we had this issue with like Postgres where I can't remember what was the exact query that we were looking didn't work, and then we had to like dig down into the source code just to discover that there was a bug in Postgres. You know what I mean? Like it's a pain. It's pain. It's like that kind of pain. Like, but it's the way that you kind of like get through to it, lah. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Aaron.
Welcome. Thank you. Thank you so much
Thanks for being with us.